Hello everyone, welcome back to the Card Combo Show, me Chocobilly, and I'm going to be looking at the Cecil vs Golbez Opus 17 Starter Deck. There are a total of 10 unique cards to the deck, with lots of other cards included in there. It released just before Opus 17 released, but so it didn't include actually a couple of decent Opus 17 cards in there, namely the Sid Polendina Searcher card. But some of the cards are really interesting. Some of them are not very good, some of them are really good. And I'll be going over all 10 of the cards now. Because I'm doing 10 cards and not 5, it means there'll be a few less combos per card, but still some cool stuff nonetheless. So yeah, we have Kain, Zemus, Scarmiglione, however you want to say it, Baigan, Golbez, Edge, Kain again, Rydia, Rosa, and finally Cecil. Right, first up we have Kain, who's a 3-cost 7k fire forward. Before paying the cost to cast Kain, you can remove 1 dark forward in your break zone from the game to reduce the cost to cast Kain by 2. He has haste, and then when Kain attacks, Kain gains 2000 power until the end of the turn. So it can potentially come a 1 CP haste 9k fire forward, which is not too bad, but it does require you to have a dark forward in the break zone. So the Emperor from Opus 1. So the Emperor, when he's put from the field into the break zone, you can search another Emperor and play it onto the field dull, which obviously would then mean the Emperor's in the break zone. You can then remove it to then play Kain, who will then be a little bit cheaper. Reagan. So Reagan I actually quite like. Citra gets played mostly because she can recur your summons, but I like Reagan because you can recur your forwards and your backups. But yeah, ultimately you can pay 1 dull and discard 1 dark card, which if you're running Reagan will probably be another Reagan. And then choose 1 forward, it loses 7,000 power until the turn. So you actually have the means of getting that dark card into the break zone, make something minus 7k, hopefully kills the thing. And then you can remove that card to then also make it so Kain costs a little bit less as well. Hooded Man. So an Opus 17 card. When Hooded Man enters the field, you can choose 1 card named Hooded Man or card named Kain in your break zone. You may remove it from the game. When you do so, activate all the backups you control and draw 1 card, which is a interesting ability in Lightning, and in Lightning Fire that can be really good as well, because they have, the 2 elements have quite decent chip damage, but if you run out of using your backups, you have to start playing from hand. That may not be so great. So being able to remove the Kain to play Hooded Man and reactivate your backups and draw your card as well means that you can fund a bit more of just, killing stuff. And what's also funny is that you're both these cards have similar effects in that you get rid of the thing from the break zone to then play it for cheaper. But yeah, either way, Fire Lightning is an element combo I've quite enjoyed playing recently, so these two may work well together. Theodore. So, when Theodore enters the field, you may dull 3 active category 4 characters you control. When you do so, choose 1 character of cost 4 or more, break it, and then at the beginning of your attack phase, during each of your turns, activate all the category 4 forwards you control. So you can play Theodore, or actually play Kain onto the field and Theodore onto the field, and then dull 3 characters, go to attack phase, and then reactivate Theodore and Kain. What's good about this is the fact that you can play Kain onto the field for cheap, so maybe you only use your backups for this. You play Kain onto the field for cheap, you then play Theodore onto the field, and then dull Kain, Theodore, and another 4 forward you control to go to attack phase. Kain can also attack as well, so maybe you break your opponent's only blocker and swing through with Kain. Alright, next up we have Zemus. So remove the top 7 cards of your deck from the game, choose 1 forward, deal it 7k damage, you can only use ability once per turn, and then remove the top 15 cards from the deck from the game, choose 1 forward, remove from the game, you can only use ability once per turn. So, a pretty scorched earth approach, but if it allows you to push for game, then it's not the worst. And removing cards from the game isn't as bad as it used to be due to a little card called X-Death. So yeah, I mean, you play X-Death onto the field, you get to remove pretty much everything from both players' break zones anyway, but make it so that you can use Zemus just to remove 15 cards from your deck. Even if you've only removed 5 from playing X-Death onto the field, X-Death is now going to get his ability. What's even better is that Zemus, when you remove something from the game, when you remove the 15 cards from the game, you then get to remove something else. So actually, 16 cards from the game are now removed, which, again, funds X-Death. Once you get to that 20 count, it doesn't really matter. You don't need to keep counting past that point. But still, a nice way to be able to get rid of some of your opponent's forwards. And let's say your opponent has a forward and a couple of backups. You can use Zemus' effect to remove the forward, and then probably put X-Death at 20 cards or plus. You then go to pass your turn. X-Death then gets to remove one of your opponent's backups or monsters, whatever. Kyrie. So you play Kyrie onto the field to look at your top 2 cards. You get to look at your opponent's hand as well, but don't care about that so much. Look at the top 2 cards just to make sure that the cards that Zemus is going to be removing aren't too important, because you can then put them to the bottom of your deck if they are important. Adelaide. So dealing 7k for Zemus's first effect is okay, but it's not amazing. So there are lots of cards that can just withstand that damage. So making it so that you can double the damage using Adelaide, so it then becomes 14k, ain't too bad. Yeah, so it's remove 7, then pay 2 fire to deal 14k something. And then obviously Go-Go, because if there's an action ability and it's a forward or a monster, use Go-Go. And Fire, Lightning, Fire, Ice, sorry, is very much a thing. But yeah, just be able to remove 7 and then deal, I don't know, 7k to 2 different forwards to the same forward, or if you've got Adelaide on the field, double the damage, and then you deal 14k to 2 different things. That's quite funny as well. Or you can just remove 15 and remove 2 forwards from the opponent's game. Yeah, not too bad. Right, next up we have Scarmiglione. So when Scarmiglione enters the field, name 1 element. Scarmiglione gains if Scarmiglione deals damage to a forward of the named element, double the damage instead. This effect does not end until the end of the turn. And then Blood Tap, which is just an S. Choose 2 forwards, deal them 4,000 damage. If you receive 5 points of damage or more, deal them 7,000 damage instead. So a interesting ability. But what's good is that it's one of Earth's few ways of actually just dealing outright damage without having to cast, summon, or attack, or block. So, Shantoto! Just because I like this card, to be honest. So, interesting thing with Scarmiglione's S is that you can just choose 2 forwards. Now, you have to choose 2, it's not choose up to, so it means you do have to choose 2 forwards, but you can choose your own forwards. So maybe your opponent only has 1 forward and you only have Scarmiglione, you can choose just Scarmiglione and then your opponent's forward. If it is of the element you named when you play Scarmiglione, then you get to deal double that damage. But yeah, you could deal potentially 7k to Shantoto and then to the forward your opponent controls. And when Scarmiglione enters the field, you can choose Earth, so then Shantoto would take 14k, which obviously wouldn't be ideal, but that 14k would get flickered around the board and wipe everything. Ninja. So when Ninja enters the field, choose 1 forward gains. When this forward attacks, choose 1 forward, deal it 5,000 damage. So the source of the damage is Scarmiglione. So if you've chosen the right element, you can play Ninja onto the field, Scarmiglione attacks, and then we'll deal 5,000, which will then be doubled if the forward is of the named element. Hades. At damage 3, pay 0 until the end of the turn. Hades also becomes a forward with 7,000 power, and when Hades attacks, choose 1 forward your opponent controls. It gains when this forward is dealt damage. Break that forward until the end of the turn. So basically, you would need to attack with Hades to then choose a forward, let that ability resolve, and then use Scarmiglione's effect to deal it 4k damage, using, or potentially 7k, but yeah, 4k damage with Scarmiglione, at which point that forward will then break because it's got the effect of when it takes damage, it breaks. Adelaide. Double the damage, double it again. I talked about this previously in the last episode, but yeah, doubling does stack. So you could have Scarmiglione on the field, it will then deal double the damage to a certain element. You then use Adelaide to double the damage regardless anyway. So let's say you chose Ice and your opponent has an Ice forward and a Fire forward. You use Adelaide. So then when you use Scarmiglione's S ability, you will deal 4 or 7 doubled to the Ice forward, but then doubled again because of Adelaide, and you get to deal 28k to the Ice forward, and you get to deal 14k to the Fire forward, which is bonkers. Right, next up we have Baigan, who is a 4 CP 8k Earth forward with EX Burst. When Baigan enters the field, you may search for 1 card named Golbez and add it to your hand, and then you can put Baigan into the break zone, choose 1 forward your opponent controls, break it. You can only use this ability if you control a card named Golbez. Thank God there isn't a Golbez backup, because when there is one, Baigan is going to be played alongside that, because he just searches a Golbez, doesn't matter what he is, and then similarly, you can put Baigan into the break zone to break something regardless of what Golbez is. So, Golbez. I mean, this card is kind of limited in what you can do with it anyway. But yeah, playing Baigan to then search this Golbez for your Golbez deck to then get him onto the field, and then you can put Baigan into the break zone to break something if you wanted to. The one problem with that is that you probably don't want to break your opponent's forwards because you want to give yourself as many opportunities as you can to break Golbez, which includes your opponent attacking and blocking with Golbez. Now, thankfully, Baigan doesn't allow you to break any forward. It's only, well, it's any forward your opponent controls, not your own as well. So you can't play Baigan, play Golbez, and then put Baigan in the break zone to then break Golbez. But still, being able to search the Golbez is really nice. I know in Earth you do have Tyro and stuff like that as well, but just another card that specifically gets your Golbez ain't too bad. And then Star Sybil. So it might be a case that you play Baigan to search the Golbez, but obviously playing Baigan and then Golbez in the same turn is quite expensive. So play Baigan to get Golbez, to then crack Star Sybil to play Golbez onto the field immediately. And then this other Golbez. So playing Baigan to get this Golbez, to then play this Golbez, which then searches you cards, is actually not too bad. And not to mention the fact that these are 2 EX burst searchers anyway. Obviously they are over 3 different elements here, but that doesn't really matter when you're running a Golbez deck. What's kind of ironic, I always found, with this Golbez, though, is the fact that one of his 2 elements isn't an element that's covered with the Archfiends. Now, I know it's his original element, but I always thought that was kind of weird anyway. But ultimately, yeah, at damage 6, you could play this Golbez to then search yourself the 4 Archfiends and play them onto the field, which is quite nice. But yeah, searching a searcher isn't too bad. And the fact you can go to Baigan into Golbez into a 2 CP backup is kind of good if you really need to. I mean, obviously that's not great, but just being able to play that isn't the worst. It might be a 2 CP backup that actually has a really good effect. It actually can be a summon off 2 CP as well, so maybe just you're looking for that one card that allows you to just kind of push through. Regis. So obviously you can put Baigan into the break zone to then break something, but you are required to have a Golbez on the field at the time. You could play Regis, Baigan, and then something else. Let's go with Gilgamesh, who can also put himself into the break zone to then break a forward. You play Regis onto the field, you then bring Baigan and Gilgamesh back. You then get to search a Golbez off of the Baigan anyway, and then you can put Baigan and Gilgamesh back into the break zone to break something again. And yeah, again, you do need to have Golbez on the field to be able to use Baigan's break effect. Right, we have Edge. When Edge enters the field, choose one forward opponent controls. If you control 4 or more category 4 characters, break it. And then Mirage, which is an S, and Lightning, remove Edge from the game. Then play Edge onto the field. So yeah, that includes backups as well, which is really, really nice for Edge. Probably going to be quite nice to, or quite easy to break something, to be honest. I did see a deck coming out of Japan that just utilizes all of these cards from the starter deck, as well as just basically any 4 card over the past few sets, and some of the older sets, to be honest. And it was just like an incredible multicolor mess, but you can tell that it would work really, really well. And yeah, just be able to use his S ability to be able to keep on replaying him, to keep on breaking stuff, is really cool. So Octomammoth. Edge states characters, which includes monsters as well. So there are a few 4 monsters. You've got Octomammoth, Trapdoor, Mom-Bomb. I can't remember the last one. I think there was one more. But yeah, ultimately they will also count towards Edge as well. Lilties. When Lilty blocks, choose one forward in your break zone out to hand. So if you've already got the 4 characters there, it means that if you just have Lilty on the field, and this is a card that isn't traditionally played very much anyway, if you've got Lilty just on the field there, waiting to block, and your opponent knows you've got Edge in the break zone, it means that they're probably not going to want to attack, because then you can immediately use Edge's S. If they do attack, knowing full well that you can block with Lilty to get the Edge S to then use Edge, that means your opponent has a retort, so be wary. And Durando, a more aggressive version, I guess. So when you attack with Durando, if you deal a point damage to your opponent, you get to get 2 characters. Is it 2 characters? 1 forward from your break zone and 1 back from your break zone, sorry. And add it back to your hand, which obviously will be Edge and probably something else. But either way, just a really nice way to be able to recur the S's for your Edge card. Right, finally, which is not final. Next up we have Kain, who is an 3 CP 7k lightning forward with the EX burst. When Kain enters the field, choose one water category 4 character in your break zone, add it to your hand, and then if you don't control a forward other than Kain gain plus 1000 and haste. So, to be honest, quite a nice EX burst, although it is particularly niche as a category 4 character in your break zone. But still, you know, run it in a 4 deck is not the worst thing in the world. So Porum. When Porum enters the field, activate all the forwards you control, which actually isn't the worst. And the S ability, which is literally just a discard for the S. Choose one forward you control during this turn. The next damage dealt to it becomes 0 instead, which again isn't a bad ability. So being able to play Kain onto the field to get you that S back if you just used it is a nice little form of protection. Again, Porum, a Porum that will always be going to the break zone to recur those summons. So being able to play Kain to then get Porum back onto the field, again, not too bad. And then finally Quan, dull and pay 1. Choose one forward you control until the end of the turn. It gains plus 2000 power and haste. You can only use ability if you control 1 forward. And Kain, if you only control him, means that he'll gain plus 1000 as well. So maybe your opponent is attacking with their forwards, you block with the other forward you have. Kain will then go up in power. You can then use Quan on Kain, so he immediately jumps from being a 7k to a 10k. Right, next we have Rydia, and this is probably one of the best cards to come out of this out of the deck. So when Rydia enters the field, you may search for 2 summons, each with a different cost. Then your opponent selects one card among them and puts it into the break zone, and the other to your hand. When you cast a summon, choose one forward your opponent controls. It loses 1,000 power for each CP required to cast the summon until the end of the turn. So, big thing with Rydia is that it loses 1,000 power for each CP required to cast that summon, which is the printed cost, not the amount you actually pay for it. So if you cast a summon and you've got Una and some other stuff on the field, and that reduces the cost, doesn't matter, it is the printed cost of the summon to do. Man in Black. So yeah, being able to constantly recur and cast your summons using Man in Black and then using Rydia's effect is great. But what's also funny is that it can trick your opponent. So you play Rydia onto the field and you go and grab 2 different summons, and your opponent will obviously make you discard the more problematic summon. You then play Man in Black, that summon is removed from the game, and then you can cast it anyway. Obviously you've had to pay the 5 for Man in Black regardless, but it means that even though your opponent thought they got rid of it by putting it in the break zone, they haven't, because now you can still cast it anyway, which is horrible. Minwu. So when Minwu attacks, you may cast a summon of cost 4 or less from your hand without paying the cost, but it doesn't matter because you've cast a summon, which will still trigger Rydia's effect, which then means you get to choose a forward and lose 1,000 power for each CP of that summon, which will be a maximum of 4, which isn't the most, but it depends what summon you're casting with Minwu as well. Either way, being able to just minus 4k something on a Minwu attack, and then also cast a summon, not too shabby. Summoner. So a card that I used to run quite a lot, but it doesn't really get run that much more any of these days. But actually being able to break a backup to cast a 6 CP summon means now you get to choose a forward and it loses 6,000 power, provided it's a 6 CP summon, of course. And then, you know, most 6 CP summons are pretty effective anyway. So, you know, you're probably going to be breaking something or recurring lots or lots of fun things. Seymour. So playing Rydia, you get to keep a summon, you then get to put someone into the break zone, you then play Seymour, because hopefully that'll be at least the 3rd summon in your break zone, which means Seymour will then get to break something. So as you can see, I obviously like running Rydia with some lightning cards here, because there's a lot of lightning summon synergy recently. Maya. So she is a 1 CP 7k water forward with haste, she cannot attack or block, and then Dull, cast 1 summon from your hand. The cost required to cast it is reduced by 3 and can be paid using CP of any element. It cannot become 0. Remove that summon from the game after use instead of putting it into the break zone. So you've got to make sure that it's not someone you don't want to get back, but you are going to get to make a summon minus 3. Now, the one thing to bear in mind here is the fact that you're really going to be wanting to use Maya more than once for her to be effective, because of the fact that she's 1 CP and then she's a card from hand, which is a total of 3 CP, and she's reducing the cost of a summon by 3 CP, but then she's also removing the summons from game, so it's going to need to be a very summon heavy deck, I think, for her to really be useful alongside Rydia. But still, if you combine her with something like Una, it means that the summon, if it's a water summon you cast, is now reduced by 4 CP, so you can cast a big old 2 CP Leviathan, for example, and it only costs you 2, which then means that Rydia can minus 6k something, and you get a water character back to your hand, and you get to bounce one of your opponents forward, something like that. Either way, it's a nice way to be able to get some cheap removal. Rosa. So she is a 4 CP 8k water forward. Pay 0. Select one of the 2 following actions. If you control a card named Cecil, select up to 2 of the 2 following actions instead. And you can only use this ability once per turn. Sorry, I know I sound super ill. It's because of just hay fever. It hates me. I love summer. So you can choose up to 2 of 2 if you control Cecil. So choose one forward, activate it, or choose one forward against plus 1,000 power until the end of the turn. To be honest, activate it is probably the better ability here, but still having that 1,000 power buff is always going to be useful as well. To just have the Cecil backup, because Rosa doesn't care, again, what the Cecil card is, as long as it's on the field and it's card named Cecil, she gets to use both her abilities. And the Cecil backup isn't the worst either. You do have to break it to use its effect, so then obviously you won't get both of Rosa's effects from that, but still having Cecil just passively there, giving Rosa both of her effects, actually is quite nice. 7. So you can Dull 7, choose your opponent's auto ability. If your opponent doesn't pay 2, cancel its effects. You can, if your opponent does pay the 2, you can then use Rosa to activate 7, to then use her ability again, to make it so your opponent has to pay 2 again. 7 isn't the best card in the world, but if you include her in a deck with some decent reactivation, I actually think she isn't too bad. But yeah, your opponent plays Shantoto, you make them pay 2, they discard a card, you then reactivate, you use 7 again, you make your opponent discard a card again, potentially. Making Shantoto go from a 7k backup to an 11k backup is pretty nasty, so not the worst, I don't think. Alice the Ensorcelled. So she enters the field dull and doesn't reactivate in your active phase, but when she attacks, your opponent selects 1 forward they control and put it into the break zone, which is pretty nasty, to be honest. So just being able to pay 0 with Rosa to activate Alice and then attack with her, pretty good. Maria. Now this is a fun little weird combo. So when Maria enters the field, you get to choose a backup and it also becomes a forward, but it loses abilities. If it's a 2 CP forward, then it also gains plus 2000 power because Maria buffs all the forwards of plus 2 other than herself. So you could, let's say, use Rosa's effect to, or let's say you play Maria onto the field and choose, I don't know, the 2 CP Cecil backup. It now becomes a forward. Obviously you can't use his effects, but he's a 2 CP forward, which is now 8k, which is actually 10k because of Maria's effect. You can use Rosa to reactivate it and then gain plus 1000. So now it's an 11k forward. And you can also still use that as a backup. So you can still use it to generate. So maybe your opponent attacks with a forward. You use Rosa to make Cecil stand up, gain plus 1000. He's now an 11k, potentially block. And then you can dull him again to cast a summon or use it for CP of another ability or something like that. But yeah, one of the things I really like about Maria is the fact that the backups stay as backups. So it means that you can attack with them or something like that, whatever. But as long as they are still active, you can then also dull them to pay for CP for other things as well, which is kind of funny. Right, Cecil. So 3 CP, 8k light forward. If you control 6 or more 4 characters, the category 4 forwards you control gain plus 2000 power and brave. Dull 2 active category 4 characters, choose one forward, dull it. Dull 4 active category 4 characters, choose one forward, deal it 8k damage. So like a weird variance on Dancers, the Lilisec kind of engine, but yeah, ultimately be able to give all your 4 characters, or 4 forwards, sorry, plus 2k and brave is not too bad, but again, you would need a lot of 4 characters on the field for this to happen. So Rydia actually, so Rydia would give all the 4 forwards plus 1000 power and brave anyway, but then you've got Cecil on the field, and if you've got 6 characters, it then means they all gain plus 2 as well, and again, brave through Cecil. So it means you've got more consistency of giving all your 4 characters brave, but also potentially plus 3, not just plus 2 or plus 1. And then Theodore, so when Theodore, at the beginning of your attack phase, you get to activate all the 4 characters you control, so it means that you could potentially play Cecil, Theodore, use Theodore's effects to be able to dull stuff, or break stuff, sorry, or you can use Cecil's effect to dull stuff, deal 8k stuff, and then Theodore reactivate stuff, and then you can potentially use use Cecil's effects again to dull stuff out of the way or deal 8k stuff. And then if you go to your end phase and you have Hooded Man, who activates all your 4 characters, all your 4 forwards at the end of the turn, you can then use Cecil's effects again then as well. So yeah, wow. Golbez. This seems kind of strange, but actually using Golbez's effect to break and then search all of the Archfiends onto the field means that you've then got quite a few 4 forwards on the field, which will then push you towards using Cecil's or having Cecil buff everything. And if you combine that with Barbarisha, at the end of your turns, if you control 4 or more Archfiends, for Archfiend forward, you can search a card named Golbez and play it onto the field. So let's say you've just got Cecil and Golbez on the field, and Golbez dies for whatever reason, probably you break him. You can then search the 4 Archfiends, bring them onto the field, including this Barbarisha, and if you can pass your turn and your opponent doesn't get rid of them, then you can also search Golbez, play him back onto the field, and now you have 4 characters on the field just in your forwards alone, which means that everything gains plus 2000 and brave. That's not too bad, and not to mention the fact that you also now can use Cecil's effects as well to dull 8k stuff or just dull stuff out of the way. And finally Asura, which funnily enough is a 4 summon. But yeah, choose 2 forwards, activate them, choose 5 backups, activate them. There are loads of 4 backups, so activating your backups and then be able to use Cecil's dull abilities, because you can dull characters as well, is pretty good. Or just activate 2 forwards, maybe block with something, and then dull 2 to dull something else out of the way, I don't know. Yeah, just a nice little option if you want to keep on using Cecil's effects. Finally, we have Golbez. So you may reduce the cost to cast Golbez by 2. If you do so, when Golbez enters the field, put Golbez into the break zone. And then when Golbez enters the field, select one of the 2 following actions. Choose one forward, break it, or choose one character other than light or dark in your break zone, add it to your hand. And then here's a 6 CP, 9k dark forward. A little thing of note, in the FAQ they mention that when you reduce the cost to cast Golbez by 2, if you do so, when Golbez enters the field, put him into the break zone. That effect is a stackable effect. So when he enters the field, him being put into the break zone enters the stack. So your opponent can respond to that if they want. I don't know what they... I mean, they might cast something like Leviathan to put him on top of your deck or the bottom deck or whatever. But there are things that could happen to stop him from going to the break zone. But that wouldn't mean that you wouldn't get his other entry effects as well, which also stack at the same time. So you can stack them in a different order if you want to. But ultimately, if you do make him only cost 4 to come onto the field and break something, a 4 CP Dark Summon to break any forward isn't that bad, and that's basically what he is at that point. Spiritus. Now this is a combo I'm really going to have to try. So when a Dark Forward other than Spiritus you control is put from the field into the break zone, choose up to 1 forward, remove from the game. This effect will only trigger once per turn. So yeah, you play Golbez into the field with a reduced cost, you then put him into the break zone, which then triggers Spiritus, and then remove something from the game. Nice. Camelot, yeah, so maybe you play Spiritus onto the field, you then pay Spiritus's cost effect, so pay 5 to then search Camelot to play that onto the field, which can then in turn search you Golbez to hand, and then provided Spiritus then the following turn, or you want to play him this turn, you can play Golbez, remove, or then put him in the break zone, then remove something from the game using Spiritus as well. Talika, so you can dull Talika to reduce the cost of Golbez as well, so it means that actually you could make Golbez cost 3, sorry. But yeah, it's just kind of funny if you do so. And paying 3 to be able to break just anything ain't too bad, but really you have still paid for, because you've got to remember that dulling Talika, if you're only using one thing with the dull Talika, you've basically just not reduced the cost of anything. However, if you combine it with something like Muraga Fens, what you can do is use Talika to make it so that Golbez only costs 3 if you choose to reduce his cost. You play Golbez, you then put him in the break zone, you get to break one of your opponent's forwards potentially. You can then play Muraga Fens onto the field for only 2, which then gets you Golbez back to hand, and then you can play Golbez again if you want for, again, only 3. Or you could, you know, just keep him in hand and then do something similar the following turn. Either way, being able to, just as long as you cast multiple things with Talika and not just the one thing, then yeah, it'll be worth it. But being able to use the Golbez, break something, get him back to hand, and then again being able to use Muraga Fens to get him back is nice. And that is it. The starter deck has, like I said, some cards and some really good cards. The Kain cards are kind of, in my opinion, not the best, but they probably work in a limited setting. But when you consider like the more meta stuff, I'm not so sure. But being able to use something like Kain to be able to get back your Porums or what have you is quite nice. But Rydia really is just a fantastic card. I quite like Scarmiglione myself personally. Golbez, again, really, really good. And if you are making just a really tribal 4 deck, Cecil is super strong, and using stuff like Edge as well, again, incredibly strong. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of the 4 starter deck, and maybe some of the cards you comboed it with as well, now that Opus 17 is out. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. Stay safe, be lucky, don't be ill, and I'll see you in the next video.